Her muscles were loose and relaxed, a product of the couples massage he'd surprised her with upon their return. Who'd have thought heated stones between your toes could make a girl feel so good? I'm on board with that. Especially as he was far better at gin than she was, so she'd be naked faster, necessitating more hot sex, which, of course, was why he proposed it. He sat, shuffling the deck as she brought him his drink, and settled in across from him. I'm quite sure you are planning to cheat and get me naked. Again that grin, the one that dropped panties for miles around, but only belonged to her these days. Never failed to send a flash of desire straight to all her pink places. Now, to be fair, Roberta, I do believe I've had you naked a time or two. He dealt the cards while she sipped her drink. She sighed happily, choosing to ignore his use of her given name to tease. Yes, you have. You're very good at that. One of those naturals. Though I have to tell you, I had such filthy fantasies about you when I was a teenager. His gaze slid from his cards to her face. You made a reference to that some years ago, but never got specific. You should. First setting her drink aside, Rory leaned forward, licking her lips, drawing out the tease, and whispered in his ear, I used to think about the times you'd come over to our house, and I'd sneak out and we'd talk for hours. I always felt like I got to see the secret side of you. Made me feel special. She knew he'd be smiling. So, one night, as we were sitting on your tailgate and looking up at the stars, you'd lean into me and kiss me, all sudden-like. You'd even use your tongue, like I saw you do with Natalie Prater at the Dairy Queen. He laughed, squeezing her waist. And what else did I do to you then? Oh, I don't know. You told me you loved me and that I was the prettiest girl you'd ever seen, and we got married. I was 15. I probably let you feel me up. She found herself on her back on the couch with him looming over her. Oh, yeah? Yeah. He bent to kiss the lips she'd just licked nervously. I don't know if you'd have been ready for me back then. He kissed her again, sucking the sense right out of her head. I sure wouldn't have been ready for you. So very fierce and serious. He sat and turned the force of his attention back to her again. So, Rory, what say we make this game interesting? How about the loser of each round has to take off a piece of clothing? She swallowed, hard, when she realized he'd put on that 17-year-old self. Only if you want to. The corner of his mouth rose just a bit. We can stop if you think we go too far. She twirled a curl around her finger. All right, but you can't tell anyone. Sugar, do you think I'd do that? What we do together is meant for us. Damn, he was good. Cripes, no wonder half the town drooled after him. They played, and predictably she lost and teased him, taking an earring off. He shook his head. Never pegged you for a cheater. She took off a sock instead. That's better. I like that color. He pulled her foot into his lap and began to massage it. Holy cow, he was good with his hands. On it went. She managed to beat him back a few times until he had no socks and no shirt, but that only made him hotter, sitting there in low-slung jeans and bare feet, the fiend. Ah, there we go. He watched, gaze sliding down her legs where she'd taken her jeans off. She blushed, feeling quite distinctly a lot like that girl she'd been. That a man with a face and a body like Jude would turn eyes filled with desire and attraction on her gave her butterflies. She wasn't wearing a bra, having taken it off before the massage and not bothering to put it back on after. One more loss and she'd be down to her panties. Hot damn. Well, and look at that. He tallied up the round and underlined his score. Looks like I win in more ways than one. He put his cards down slowly, with that deliberateness he had, and then made his way to her. I want to see you, he said, his lips against hers. The kiss was a slow, gentle exploration of her mouth. Teasing her lips open and then sliding inside, his tongue sinuous against hers. His body never fully made contact with her at any point but their lips, but she felt him anyway, the heat and force of him. All that energy and chemistry he exuded brushed against her. And then he drew away, staying close enough she could see the swell of his lips and know hers looked the same. "Show yourself to me." Swallowing hard, she brought her shaky hands to the hem of her sweater and pulled it up and off. The air against her bare skin felt good, but the look on his face was better. Reverence, admiration, desire, and possession. He traced a fingertip from her belly-button ring up the valley between her breasts, up over and then across the blade of her collarbone, a ghost of a touch rimming the hollow of her throat, and then he collared her. The breath whooshed from her as the intensity of her response spread like wildfire, startling her with just how good it felt to have his hand around her throat. Not squeezing, not harming, just holding in a hand big enough and strong enough to do damage should he want to, and her total trust he never would. What had been seated deep within her the longer she loved Jude, what had been digging roots and quietly becoming stronger, flowered. He possessed her. Yes, he loved her. Yes, he dominated her in bed, topped her, but this was something else. Everything inside went still. All she saw, felt, smelled was him. This is what it felt like to be owned by someone, heart and soul. Not owned like a slave or a thing, but to belong to someone as they belonged to you. Her pupils swallowed the color in her eyes as her breath caught and then exhaled, hard and shaky. It fascinated him to watch her face as she fell into her submission so deeply. But this was different. More. Something inside him clicked into place, and when he took her mouth again, it was far beyond the teasing fantasy play they'd been engaging in. "I think I need to make those beams up there do their thing. Bring me the bag." He stood, helping her to stand. Glad he'd decided to invest in the better suspension cuffs to hold her wrists and arms more comfortably for her, he rigged the line up and over the beam and tested his weight on it. When he turned his gaze to her again, she watched him carefully. Her nipples stood out, hard and dark. "Come here and bring those black cuffs there." He indicated the cuffs he'd laid on the nearby bed, knowing she'd have peeked at them over and over as he worked. She did, holding her hands out once she'd given him the cuffs. Goose flesh rose on her skin as he put the cuffs on her, tightening them, monitoring her reactions as he did. She was on board. He could tell not only by the way she thrust herself closer, but by the hitch in her breathing, by the way she licked her lips and eagerly followed his instructions. And when he pulled the line, tautening it, bringing her arms up slowly over her head, they both sighed. He tied off the line on the arm of the nearby chair, an easily broken slipknot, as he never wanted to be unable to pull her free as quickly as possible. The position was one of his favorites, her back arched, breasts thrust forward. He circled her, slowly, leaning in to brush a kiss on her shoulder or a caress at her hip. He held up the longer flogger and the crop. "Which one, darling?" He flicked the crop, loving the sound, the weight in his hand. The flogger creaked, the leather of the handle fitting his palm like he was meant to wield it. He twirled it, sending the tails swishing, a deceptively soft sound. He drew the tails over the small of her back, against the top of her ass and down against the backs of her thighs. "Yes, I think so too." He bent to put the crop away. When she was like this, there was nothing else. Arms above her head, the cuffs lovingly wrapped snugly around each wrist, she was utterly at his mercy, totally on display. She loved it, craved it. Her skin was alive as she waited for the first lick of the tails. He knew she waited and drew it out, circling her over and over. He drew the flogger over her nipples, over her belly and thighs, over her back and ass, and just as she'd been lulled into a dreamy, sort of sleepy state, the first strike. The tails, leather and suede on the outside and rubber on the inside, kissed just the side of pain against the place where thigh met ass. The only reason she was able to keep her eyes open was how much she loved to watch the expression he wore as he flogged or used the crop on her. Arrogant, intense with concentration. Every few strokes he'd look into her face to be sure she was all right. She loved that, too. She pulled against the cuffs, not to get free. She could if she just said the word. But the struggle, the faux struggle, stretched her muscles in her back, arched her closer to him. The heat of the strokes of the flogger tails built over her ass and thighs, against her mound. And what an unexpectedly hot discovery that had been. And then he played them with perfect strength against her nipples, making them throb in all the best ways. Hands, sure and strong, undid the cuffs and took her weight, tossing her up and over his shoulder as he carried her into the alcove where the bed was, which was good, as there was no way she could have walked just then. Gentle kisses laid a trail over her chest and shoulders. Hands that had her hair held in a fist now caressed and soothed. This was the other half, the part that made the first so incredibly intense. This was who they were, strong and dark sometimes, edgy, and yet there was genuine love, friendship, a concern for the happiness and well-being of the mate. It made her safe and content, as well as thrilled and titillated. The balance was different than it had been with Zack, but no less strong, no less tangible and sweet. One day, perhaps, she'd tell him so, but not now. This was about the two of them and the path they forged with each touch. Her fearless, protective, bossy male stepping more fully into his role as her man. "I love you," she managed to say, used to and still surprised each time by the slow honey of her voice when he'd tipped her into subspace. "Ah, beauty, what you do to me." He kissed her chin. Drawn to him, she found the energy to slide her palms up his sides. "More, please." He knelt to get his jeans down and off. No drawers. She managed a snort of laughter, which quickly died away when she gasped at the sight of his cock. Hard, so hard, it tapped his belly. All because of her. All for her. When her gaze managed to tear from his wedding tackle, she caught that look on his face, that knowing he had of what made her the most weak-kneed and hot. "I'm going to fuck the hell out of you." If he hadn't rendered her absolutely senseless with that statement, she'd have told him how very on board she was with that. She may have managed a nod, though, because that grin ghosted over his mouth as he settled in between her thighs. She writhed, trying to get closer as he fisted his cock and pumped a few times. Hands to yourself. I'm just looking my fill at you." Wet. "God, your pussy is dark and swollen, and your tits." He sighed happily, all the while continuing to withhold himself, knowing how much she wanted that cock inside her. "Your nipples are hard and swollen. It only makes the rings look hotter. Your skin—" With his free hand, he trailed a fingertip over the marks the flogger had left behind, up her belly and over each nipple. "Is such a pretty pale pink where the flogger kissed it." His gaze, which had been following his hand up her body, returned to her face with a snap of attention. She'd been nearly panting, but the breath snagged in her throat at how he looked at her. "Knees up." She closed her eyes a second as she quickly complied, spreading herself open wide. But instead of following to fuck her, he got to his belly and pressed his face to her pussy, bringing a gasp tearing from her gut and her hips up and into his mouth. Orgasm hit her hard and fast, but he didn't stop. He pushed her up and over a second time, and even as she still sought to catch her breath, he moved and began to push inside. Easily enough, it turned out, as he'd made her so slick. In one hard thrust, he was in her so deep, pressed flesh to flesh, it made her mindless, sending her over into a series of slow, rolling climaxes as he began to fuck her. He took his time, rolling his hips to get as deep as he could, the base of his cock pressing against her clit with each stroke. His abs actually rippled as he moved, driving her crazy. "Your body is so sexy." She managed to get the words out, glad when she saw his slight blush and then that cocky smile of his. He drew closer. She could feel it in the way his muscles began to tense up, the way his smooth thrusts began to stutter here and there, and when he came, he pressed his forehead to hers and whispered that he loved her. More than that, he owned her, body and soul. Confidently and with care, all at once. They clicked into a new level of connection, bigger than she'd ever imagined. It was good and right. Solid and unbreakable. Chapter 7. I'll begrudgingly admit that this is really nice. Not as good as you eating pie off my pussy or anything, but as far as Christmas Eve dinners, this one is amazing. She motioned toward the table between them, filled with all their favorites. I'll keep the pie thing in mind. Still plenty of time left in pumpkin pie season. She couldn't help but laugh. She felt good, light and filled with joy. The reason for it sat across from her, looking delicious enough to take a bite out of. The inn's restaurant was beautifully decorated, pleasing the eye, making her feel very much in the holiday spirit. I propose this becomes our first Christmas tradition. He cocked his head. Yeah? You don't miss being with Kelly tonight? I love my family and all, and I love living near them all so we can share great memories with them, but we get to make our own memories too. I like this one. I like having you all to myself, and I know I can get you to bend on the midnight thing with my feminine wiles. If we were with Max and Kelly now, you'd have all sorts of backup to make me wait. He laughed, taking her hand and kissing her fingertips. I like having you all to myself sometimes, and I agree it would be a good thing to make this our holiday tradition. We can change it up after we have kids. He licked his lips, looking her over carefully. It wasn't that they hadn't talked about kids in the future, they had, but he'd been treading carefully, waiting for her to be in the same place he'd been. She knew it, and she appreciated it. But it was time they moved that next step forward, and she also understood it was up to her to give him that sign she was ready. Rory would always have fond memories of her marriage and relationship with Zach. She'd miss him until she died, but he was her past, and this man across from her was not only her past, but her future. He put a wrapped box on the table, small and square, pale blue and wrapped with a white ribbon. I guess you're right about those feminine wiles getting your present before midnight. With shaking hands, she opened the box and found a beautiful engagement ring inside, and then she found a beautiful man on bended knee next to her. The crowded little restaurant hushed as people began to take notice of them in their little corner. Rory, I've loved you a long time, and I'm promising to love you forever. Will you marry me? Blinking back tears, she nodded and held her hand out for him to slide the ring on her finger. It's my job to make you happy for the rest of our lives. He grinned, and she couldn't help it. She launched herself at him, tumbling them both as he sat on his ass right in the restaurant, even as those around them clapped. Let's get out of here. He kissed her as they stood, and then she waited while he paid the bill. The low light of the restaurant caught beautifully against the diamond on her finger. They practically ran back to the cabin, laughing and planning. She stopped once he'd locked the door behind them. Oh my God, Jude Callahan, you are too good to be true. A fully decorated little tree now graced the middle of the room, and it even had their presents beneath it. I can't take credit for this. The inn handled it, along with that little shop you were in earlier today. I arranged it a few weeks back, and seeing the look on your face is worth it. Wait here." She pressed a kiss to his mouth and then scrambled to where she'd cached the item she'd picked up that afternoon in town. Jude watched her scamper around the corner and looked the room over. They'd done a great job, and he reminded himself to tip them again when they checked out. She'd said yes, without a trace of hesitation. Damn, he was a satisfied man. Blessed as all get out to have a woman like her love him the way she did. And she was back, her grin in place still, holding a box his way. "You see, I had the same idea. It must be fate." He opened it and found a ring inside. White and yellow gold hewn together. The feeling of rightness only solidified to his toes. She'd wanted it as much as he had? "I saw the ring today, and thank goodness they had your size. I'd been wanting to ask you for a while. I'd planned to ask you tomorrow anyway, but then I saw the ring and took it as a sign." He hugged her tight, breathing her in. "Shit, all I did was sneak off to get you that cashmere sweater you were drooling over. You got me a ring?" Her eyes widened, as did her smile. "You did? Where? We should open presents now, since we're getting married and it's nearly midnight anyway." "It's 9:30, hardly what I'd call nearly midnight." He held up his hands to still her argument. "But who am I to deny your wishes? You know I'm helpless against it when you want something." "This is going to be an amazing year, you know that?" She settled in at his feet as he sat near the little tree and handed her the first box. "Yeah, I do. All because of you. And, by the way, yes, I'll marry you." She tore the paper off with vicious glee and cried out when she drew the beautiful red sweater from the box. He'd seen her face when they had been in the shop and the sweater caught her eye, and he'd known she had to have it. "You spoil me. Oh, and you looked so good and taunted me with presents, so I forgot to chide you for the comment about how you hadn't done anything while I got the ring. Hello?" She waved a hand around the room and then showed him her ring again. "Santa has nothing on you. You planned all this, every bit, and it's amazing. Such a wonderful present, this getaway. You and me, all the kink we can handle and not a single interruption. The ring, the sweater, the way you planned all the meals and stuff. You take care of me. You make me happy. It's my job." He tried to sound tough and nonchalant, but it was a lie, because no one got to him like she did. He was helpless against it, and more than that, he loved it that way. Loved the way she fit inside his heart like she was made to be there. New house, wedding, and maybe even some work on that baby thing. "You mean it?" "I want to be your wife. I want to have your beautiful, blonde, green-eyed babies. I want to live every day of forever with you at my side. I love you." He got to his knees, and she jumped back with a laugh. "I know that look, Jude. Presents. Wait until after—" She didn't get the rest of the sentence out because his mouth was on hers and her arms busily wrapped around his shoulders. They didn't get to the rest of the presents until the next day.